No matter how modern we are, the shh still works. Good evening. My name is Corey Schneider, and I have the honor of being a former international president of Women's League. What a pleasure it is to welcome all of you, all you delegates, family, honored guests. While everyone here is special, I would like to acknowledge the guests who are here representing central institutions of our movement. Rabbi Bradley Artson and Rabbi Cheryl Peretz, both from the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, and Rabbi Ariel Stoffenmacher from the Seminario Rabbinico in Argentina. Welcome and thank you for being here tonight. And thank you for your faithful stewardship of the rich intellectual heritage of conservative Judaism. But tonight is dedicated to the women of conservative Judaism. We in the room are the legacy of those extraordinary women who came before us, women of vision and strength and commitment. From our movement's beginning, that first generation of Women's League leaders were on the front lines of engagement. They worked glove in hand tirelessly with rabbinic and communal leaders to forge a unique and enduring conservative Jewish identity in communities throughout North America. These pioneers were feminists before there was feminism. Which brings us to our program. Any discussion about Jewish feminism, conservative Judaism, and the Jewish Theological Seminary must include Dr. Anne Lapidus Lerner. Tonight, Women's League is here to pay tribute to Dr. Lerner. There is no better teacher, supporter, or friend of Women's League. Dr. Lerner has touched everyone, each of us in this room, whether we know it or not, either directly or through the generations of students she has taught and influenced. So before we make the official presentation, I want to call Dr. Pamela Nadell, the Patrick Clendeman Chair in Women's and Gender History at American University and the Chair of the Department of History, who is a friend, a colleague, and fellow traveler of Dr. Lerner's. Dr. Nadell.
Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's really a tremendous honor and a great pleasure. But it is a gift to me to have the opportunity this evening to celebrate Professor Anne Lerner. I don't remember when she and I first met, but I certainly remember my reaction to her trailblazing article, "Who Hast Not Made Me a Man? The Movement for Equal Rights for Women in American Judaism." I was thunderstruck when I read that article. It opened for me, who was then a very young graduate student, she published this in 1977, she opened a world that I didn't know anything about. In less than 40 pages, in clear and cogent prose, she exposed women's legal disabilities within Judaism, and a century and a half of debate over women's status in Reform Judaism. She then provided what I now realize were mostly eyewitness accounts to the discussions about women's religious emancipation underway 40 years ago in the Orthodox world, in the so-called secular Jewish world, and of course, in our own conservative movement. When I read the piece in 1977, I was learning virtually something new from every single sentence, every paragraph. When I reread it last week, in preparation for these remarks, I was stunned again. This time, I could follow sentences and paragraphs and point to articles and books spurred by this very first learned article on Jewish feminism. Professor Lerner's few paragraphs on women in Jewish law and ritual paved the way for Rachel Beal's masterful Women in Jewish Law. And I'm still shocked by how much she managed to just get in just a few short paragraphs. Her observations about the various arenas of Jewish feminism surely informed the late Paula Hyman's path-breaking book, Gender and Assimilation in Modern Jewish History. Virtually every single sentence that she wrote about the battle for women's ordination in the conservative movement, which of course was not finalized then, sparked pages in my own Women Who Would Be Rabbis. For a scholar, there is no greater testament to her impact than to see the legacy of her work in the scholarship of others. But of course, Professor Lerner's pioneering work in women's and gender studies does not rest on a single article. She published 3 books and dozens of academic and popular articles. Eternally Eve, her most recent book, is a tour de force, a meditation on the biblical verses about the creation of Eve, her life in the Garden of Eden, and her life outside the garden. It traces Eve's afterlife, how her story was written and interpreted across the millennia, from rabbinic midrashim to contemporary poetry. As Professor Lerner so evocatively writes there, the Bible never tells us that Eve died, so she continues to live in imaginative recreations and rereadings across the ages. But I would be remiss if I only spoke about Professor Lerner's contributions to women's and gender scholarship. Often, when we celebrate a scholar, we focus on the written work and we ignore her many other contributions in the classroom and service beyond the classroom. But to do so, I think, is always unjust, and in this case, manifestly unjust, because it would bypass Professor Lerner's groundbreaking achievements beyond her scholarship. She joined the seminary faculty the same year that she published Who Hast Not Made Me a Man. She went on to become the dean of the List College and then rose to be vice chancellor at JTS, a stunning accomplishment at a time when women rarely reached the upper echelons of academic administration, especially in theological schools. She did so many things at JTS, and I don't have time to talk about all of them, so I want to point to the ones that especially impacted women. She founded and directed for nearly 15 years the seminary's program in women's studies. And I know a few faculty, male or female, who note on their bios that they mentored students. But surely many of us, remembering what it was like to be a lone female wherever we were in our careers or our university studies in so many different places, will understand and appreciate how absolutely critical that was for the generations of young women and men that she has worked with at the seminary. So time precludes me from sharing anything more than these few snippets of Professor Lerner's remarkable career. A scholar, a teacher, a mentor, an activist, an innovator, a pioneer. All these describe Professor Lerner. Women's League Mathilde Schechter Award honors her lifetime of achievements this evening. As the Talmud teaches, scholars are builders, builders of the world. Professor Ann Lapidus Lerner is a scholar who has built our world, our Jewish world, and beyond. May she continue to teach and guide us for many, many more years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nadell. It is now my pleasure to call upon one of my own fellow travelers, Janet Tobin, past president of Women's League.
Am I speaking to her? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay, friend. And how truly delighted I was to be asked to present you with Women's League most prestigious accolade, the Mathilde Schechter Award. It is an award given out neither often nor lightly. Rather, its recipients are in the truly rarefied stratosphere of Jewish learning, commitment, and achievement. Few are more deserving nor reflect more appropriately the values and intellectual tradition that Mathilde held dear. Long before I became president of Women's League, you inspired me with your passion for equal rights for women in all walks of life. Your classes for the Women's League Institute and all your teaching, actually, were outstanding, filled with memorable women's literature, poetry, and your original and inspired readings of classical texts. Most important, Anne, you are Women's League's best friend, most enduring supporter and advocate. When we need you, there are only two questions: where and what time? Whether it was teaching at the New York Institute or writing articles for Outlook or your stewardship of the Wagner Institute, your partnership was unflagging. When it comes to Women's League, no task is too small. No ask is too great. So, on behalf of Women's League, we present you with this gift, an illuminate text of Psalm 117 from Deborah Band's work, I Will Wake the Dawn, Illuminated Psalms. The inscription reads, the Mathilde Schechter Award, presented by Women's League for Conservative Judaism to Anne Lapidus Lerner for her lifelong support of Women's League, its mission and history, and for her pioneering efforts on behalf of Jewish feminism. Our words. Our words are not sufficient, but they are heartfelt and true. You are a treasure, and you are my friend.
Turn around here and let me get a picture.
Nice boy. One more? Oh, okay, okay.
All right, it's mine.
You don't need this.
First, of course, thank you. Thank you to Pam, to Janet, to Corey, to all of you. Beautiful words, and it's really such an inspiring award. Receiving it is humbling, especially at this centennial celebration when we think about Mathilde Schechter and her pioneering work in founding Women's League. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehachayanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. In addition to thanking God, let me also thank some people who had a role in bringing me to this place. First, of course, my husband, Rabbi Stephen C. Lerner, an unflagging proponent of women's rights in Judaism. And look, actually, he convinced me. That's the truth. My children, children-in-law, grandchildren, some of whom are old enough to be here and up tonight, my sister and brother, and most of all, my parents, who taught me that when you face a challenge, you face it and you overcome it. What I admire most about Women's League is actually all of you. It's amazing members. Since childhood, I have known that the most intelligent, most committed, most effective and knowledgeable women in our synagogues are the Women's Leaguers. You see, my mother was the recording secretary of the Sisterhood of Temple Mishkan Tefillah in the Roxbury section of Boston. Thank you, I appreciate that. It's nice to know that some people will understand English without any ahs. And Ima would often share with us her very witty minutes. Now, I don't know what really happened at those meetings, but if they were anything like what she wrote about, they were absolutely wonderful. And it didn't hurt either that Sisterhood was responsible for distributing those chocolate bars, don't open them in shul, that followed children's services. Some things have not changed. I recently got a note from Rabbi Dana Sorokin of Bethel Congregation in Baltimore. She was talking about the sisterhood in her synagogue, and she said that they are engaged in the larger community. They've read most of the books on the Times bestseller list. They've seen the shows. They've been to the museums, and they contribute so much to the life of the synagogue that if she were not, even if she were not its rabbi, she would want to be a member of Sisterhood. Of course, some things have changed. Inspired by Women's League, we as conservative Jewish women have increasingly taken responsibility for our own religious and spiritual lives, taking on mitzvot like talit and tefillin, engaging in more observance and in study. Some even have become rabbis and cantors, and we are so blessed to have their leadership as well. Living lives imbued with Judaism and Jewish values is inspiring, and Women's League inspires a great deal of it. Over the years, I have been at JTS. I've had the opportunity to teach and learn from so many of you in Women's League institutes, at convention, in so many of your synagogues. And I never leave without having had my thinking stimulated by your Torah. I have learned so much from you. Women's League has been the dependable anchor of the Masorti conservative movement, Your clarity and consistency of vision and mission have helped maintain us at the passionate center of Judaism for the last 100 years. That's not an easy task. Conserving tradition without swaddling it, preserving it, so that it can adapt to an ever-changing world without losing itself, creating a community of women. Those have been among the great successes of Women's League, and its reach has been so broad. Representatives on the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards and at the UN. A focus on women's health, more about that during the rest of convention, and on the state of Israel. Women's League has been deeply involved in so many areas of contemporary life. Personally, I always knew where to turn with a worthwhile project involving women. Women's League has helped sponsor a conference on Jewish women's studies that explored the way in which women's studies has changed, has expanded our understanding of Judaism as a whole. And I hope some of you were at the Va'ani Tefillati 2009 prayer conference, sponsored by the denominational Jewish women's groups, by Women's League, by Women of Reform Judaism, by JOFA, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance. The prayer conference would actually not have happened at all without the help of those two powerhouse women on our professional staff, Rhonda Kahn and Lisa Kogan. And I think we should give them a shout out right now. As well as, of course, the enormous effort of the rest of the staff and so many lay leaders. And just look at the rich offerings at this convention. And further, we have seen the wonderful way in which Carol Simon has led Women's League, and we look forward to seeing the way in which Margie Miller will bring us into our second century. Thinking about tonight, over the past few weeks, I was struck again by the story in the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers, about the daughters of Tzlafchad. Tzlafchad had 5 daughters, and one of the interesting things is that every time this is mentioned, all of their names are mentioned, and there aren't that many named women in the Torah. And their names, I don't want to be remiss, Machla, Noah, Chogla, Milcah, and Tirzah. They came forward in what is clearly true sisterhood to claim that the inheritance laws, which were God's, were actually unfair to the memory of their departed father, who, having only daughters and no sons, would have no one to inherit the portion of the land that should have been his when they crossed the river Jordan and came to Canaan. They spoke truth to power, and not just any power, ultimate power. And God responded. God was convinced. God said, Cain benot Tzlafchad dovrot, the daughters of Tzlafchad speak the truth. Today, wherever we look, we see things that are not as they should be. Many of us are concerned about the state of Israel's reneging on its promise of an egalitarian prayer space at the Kotel. We need to raise our voices as women, banded together. We need to make clear to the government of Israel and to its citizens that we will not be played for fools. Speak truth to power, and we have plenty of power if we choose to use it together. And what about the blacklisting of our rabbis' conversions? How long will we stand for being told that our rabbis, not really rabbis? Our converts, not really Jews. We need to raise our voices and make them heard. Now, I don't want to pick on Israel. There are a couple of things in this country that have me a little bit disturbed, too. But I was told not to pull an all-nighter. So let me just focus on one issue that we will be talking about through the rest of the convention, and that's the issue of women's health. Imagine a committee in this day and age in which 13 men and no women sit down to figure out a health plan? Uninsured millions of Americans, many of them, I suspect, disproportionately women. Contraception and women's health are not a necessary part of an insurance plan. Don't get me started. Change the subject. Women's League. Women's League has the strength, imagination, and the capabilities to act, not just to talk, to galvanize support, to build community. As Women's League moves into its second century, it will continue to be an important voice for women's issues, Jewish issues, human issues. And in addition, it will, generations to come will find in it the strength of purpose, the spiritual meaning that enrich our lives today. Thank you. Thank you.
It is such a pleasure to preside at this honoring of Dr. Lerner. We had the opportunity while I was at my elegant dorm room at JTS during my presidency to go out to dinner several times, and I've always learned from Dr. Lerner. Thank you, and Women's League is so indebted to you. I would like to invite our panelists up at this time. So while we're waiting for our other panelists, why don't we just stretch a little bit? Exercise is always good, right?
Drank too much. Too many iced teas, so I think Cheryl thought we had another moment. She'll be right over. Yeah. You spoke so powerfully. Something to say? Yes.
Is there something to say, which is that my eyesight precludes me actually seeing.
If you want to get your walk, you could walk in place.
Okay, I'll reach out to you. Thank you for telling me. I'll say your name. Why don't you come sit next to me? That's good.
It's got to be pretty embarrassing for having like someone out there
Because they're human. Women are human beings.
when she was sitting, Trump made that comment to her about his heart.
Sorry, Cheryl. I'm sorry. I think I'm better.
So, we could say Dayenu now, but tonight we are fortunate to have 4 remarkable women here in our midst. Each one is a formidable influence in diverse but complementary worlds. It gives me great pleasure to introduce again Dr. Ann Lapidus Lerner. And Dr. Pamela Nadell. And to welcome Rabbi Cheryl Peretz, a graduate and now Associate Dean of the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies. And Rabbi Abba Soslin, from whom we heard this afternoon, graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary, and who is the spiritual advisor, the Mora, Ruchanit, and Judaic instructor at the Schechter Westchester High School. We can only imagine Mathilde and Fanny and Dora looking on with pride at these new generations of leaders as they discuss how women went from the kitchen to the pulpit.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? I am pretty honored to be in such extraordinary company, and it's so inspired by what we just heard. So from me and other students of my generation, thank you. So before we even start this panel, I would like to know how to address each of you. I like to be someone who's casual, doesn't stand on ceremony. Sure, call me Abby. On the other hand, as women, I know that we have titles that we have to honor and that sometimes are not honored by those around us. So how would you like me to speak to you tonight? And if you'd like to share with us any thoughts about your title and your name, I'd love to begin with that. Will you start? Anne? Professor Lerner, which is
I hope this is on. Is it on? Yes. Okay. So I'm an egalitarian in more areas than just religion. I don't mean just religion. I mean than religion. And so I prefer, am I doing something wrong here? I prefer that people call me Anne.
I think when we're done, we have to turn ours off.
Yeah. Okay? Okay. So, but that's an interesting problem because when I first came to JTS, I was the first American woman to be a full-time JTS faculty member. I was generally the only woman in the room, and I sort of felt that I had to assert myself by putting something in front of my name.
Microphone closer.
I thought that I had to assert myself by putting something in front of my name. So I did that for a while. And then when I became an administrator, an associate dean, or a dean, students would call me Dean Lerner. And I thought that was okay, especially when they were undergraduate students. But then I made a rule that once you graduated, you had a degree, BA, we're all equal. We're the same. Please call me Anne. It was hard for some people. I wouldn't embarrass my daughter-in-law, whom I'm so happy to have her, by saying that she really had to learn not to call me Dean Lerner. But sometimes it's tough to know what to do, and sometimes people are very formal. But for me, Anne is fine, and now that I'm not the dean of anything, everyone can call me Anne. Problem with Anne is it's only one syllable, it gets lost.
Can you hear me? Yeah? So this must be what Anne was talking about, it must really be like a university thing. Because I'm used to undergraduates who call me Professor Nadell or Dr. Nadell, and that's just fine. I like everybody else to call me Pam, except all the Israelis call me Pamela. They don't seem to know like Pam as a name, so I tend to go a lot by Pamela. when I'm dealing with Israelis. But I with you, is like, once you graduate, okay, we should be the same. But I have students who decades later are still calling me Dr. Nadel. They just can't. That's who I am to them. And I get it because that's how I felt about my own faculty.
Thank you.
So, good evening, everyone. I always answer that question by sharing with people what I do instead of giving them an answer of what I want them to do. And that's that when I'm talking to a rabbi with whom I have a relationship and I'm talking directly with them, I call them by their first name. But if I'm talking to them in front of other people or I'm talking about them, then I always refer to them as rabbi or doctor. And that feels like not taking away their honor of their title. And I just have to say that as someone who works with another male rabbi who is amazing, as you all know, and very powerful, it sometimes plays out in very significant ways to not have shared that story. I will just tell you very briefly, last year I had a student who felt that I wasn't meeting the expectations he thought he had of me as a dean and as a rabbi, and let me know that in a completely, what he may have thought was appropriate, but was really a very inappropriate way. And when I spoke to him about it, and I said to him, I said, can you imagine ever talking to Rabbi Artson in that way? And he went completely white, completely white. And it had never dawned on him until I said the words, well, then it can't be okay to talk to me that way, that he would have thought that that was okay to talk to me as a woman in that way, or as an associate dean as opposed to the dean. So I think that we're not always aware of the ways these things play out. And so I share that story.
Thank you. I think that this is an informal setting, and I feel like I want to call each of you by your first name, but I have had the experience of having occasionally male rabbis be referred to with a title, and then I'm Abby. So I get punished for my informality. And I wonder if anything like that has happened for you, or...
When I was associate dean, okay. When I was associate dean of the graduate school at JTS, Professor Meir Rabinowitz was the dean. We had a secretary whose office, desk was right between our two offices. She always referred to Meir as Professor Rabinowitz, and she always referred to me as Anne. So that's a situation where it's difficult, because on the one hand, I'm okay with Anne. I like Anne. I've gotten used to it over the years. But in a way, it was sort of saying, he's the real cheese, and you are, well. So that I think becomes a sticky situation. Incidentally, as a rabbi's wife, I have a lot of other titles that I don't answer to at all.
So I guess that would lead us into our next question, which is really the opening of this discussion, which is, what was the moment when you realized, oh, there's a difference in the way that people treat me? What was the moment for each of you that was your click moment, where you said, okay, I think I'm a feminist? You shared, we've heard a little bit about your journey, but I'm curious to hear from each of you. Cheryl, will you start us on this one?
So I am probably the one who never called myself a feminist here. And I have to tell you by illustration, unbeknownst to the people who put this panel together, what that really means. Because each of these ladies in their own way were very much a part, even in one case where they didn't know, a part of my journey. So I was an undergraduate at JTS and Columbia. And having come from San Antonio, Texas, I was brought up in a lovely family, but I didn't even know what conservative or liberal meant. And when I got to JTS, it was right at the year that they started admitting women, and I had no idea what it meant to express Judaism as a woman versus a man, what it meant to entertain the limitations of that, or even really frankly, as a woman, to know what it meant to want female role models. And Dr. Lerner, as I articulated to her last week on email, was a role model and teacher to me before I even knew that I needed a female role model or teacher. She was my dean and my teacher in class several times. And then during around that same time, I had been working at Camp Ramah, and it was actually the summer before that, and Abby was a camper who wasn't in my division, but with whom I would sit and have these wonderful conversations. And frankly, at that part of my life, her Judaism was much more developed, and her Jewish learning and Jewish thinking than mine was. So I was very much influenced by her as a student or a camper. And then fast forward about 13 or 14 years later, when I decided as a second career to go to rabbinical school and held it kind of secret from family and friends for quite some time. And when I finally started telling people, there were two reactions that I remember the most. The first is that there were 4 people who gave me Pamela's book, Women Who Would Be Rabbis.
My publisher loves you.
Yes, thank you. And that was very significant in thinking about what that would mean for me, because by that point it was really just a natural course for me. And the other was my grandmother, God rest her soul, who was an Orthodox woman who, when I told her, said, "What are you doing something crazy like that for?" And I said, "Bubby, I know you don't understand, but I really think it's what I'm meant to do." And she said, "Well, as long as you're happy, that's okay with me." And then just about a month after I started rabbinical school, I went to visit her in the nursing home where she was, and it ended up being the last time that I saw her. And she took me around to all the women in the nursing home and was introducing me, and she said, "This is my granddaughter, the one who's going to be a rabbi." And so in her own way, I knew that she was okay with this. And so I'm the feminist who was never a feminist and has just lived my life as a woman on a Jewish journey who has some experiences. And frankly, it's only since I've been a rabbi that I've been much more aware of some of those moments of distinction where women and men are truly treated differently.
So this will be, can you hear me? Is it on? Okay. So this will be one of the places where there's really the generational difference. And I think a lot of people here tonight will get what I have to say. I was in 8th grade, took one of those standardized tests, and then they called in my parents for a meeting. And the guidance counselor turned to my parents and said, "She's very smart. She can be a legal secretary or a teacher." So and I didn't really want to be either one of those. At one point, I almost became a lawyer, and I became a different kind of teacher. But it shows. So your question, what was my click moment? The click moment is something that the feminists talked about a lot. When was that epiphany? Where did you have it? I had it. It was very young, and I was aware of the discriminations against women for a long time. I mean, I remember switching school systems when we moved and going to the 6th grade teacher and saying, "I want to be a patrol." One of those people would shepherd the kindergarten kids around. And I want to be a patrol because in my old school system, they didn't let girls be patrols. So I don't have one click movement. I think I was always aware that there were biases, but that also is very much, I grew up before the feminist movement launched in the 60s. I was coming into my teens at that moment in time. So it's a big difference.
I was raised, whoops, do I have this on now? I was raised in an egalitarian household. My sister and I were talking about this a couple of days ago, thinking about this question. And we don't think that our parents ever thought that there were things that we couldn't do or shouldn't do because we were women. But on the other hand, my mother had suffered enormously, and we knew that story too, because when she was, as an appointed teacher in the Boston City schools, got married in 1940, she had to leave her position because married women were not allowed to teach in Boston. lots of stories about Boston schools. And when my mother went back and retook her exams, because when they finally let married women in, she was a new person, okay? She had to take all her exams again because she was a new person. They put her on the bottom of the salary scale because she was a new person. So that was clearly unjust. It was an unjust thing that should happen, and I knew about that. Did that make me a feminist? Not really, I think, but Simone de Beauvoir, Betty Friedan, there was a lot going around about feminism, and slowly, but very slowly, I sort of, in a way, grew into it. I wasn't kidding before when I said that it took my husband to convince me that I should, about women's role in Judaism. When I was at the age of becoming bat mitzvah, my rabbi, Izkezes, who was a close family friend, called to ask me to be the first bat mitzvah at Temple Mishkan Tefillah, and I turned him down. I said I thought that women had absolutely no business being on the bima. It was a little bit chutzpahdik to tell the rabbi what was and wasn't right. And but I offered him a bargain. He was talking about the petty fours and the punch. This was a late Friday night bat mitzvah. And I made him an offer. I said, if you want, in the social hall where you have the petty fours, and I wasn't being fresh, where you have the petty fours and the punch, I'll recite a couple of poems by Bialik in Hebrew. Wouldn't that do?
Can I just add one thing? Because I think it's so amazing to think of Dr. Lerner, who's this pioneer in the world of feminism, and that story in relation to this quick story that I wanted to tell you. So I want to bring you into a little bit of a secret that in all of the years that I have been at Ziegler School, and I'm now I just finished 16 years as a dean there. Thank you. Every once in a while I get this little itch that maybe I want to be a pulpit rabbi. And I once looked at a position in which by the end of it, they actually told me that I was the more inspirational candidate and the people that many of the members felt would most move them, but that as a single woman, I was not in the same life